Terraforming Mars Legacy. That's the announcement that we heard somewhat in passing at the end of December in a podcast called Board Games and Gumbo. And the head of Stronghold Games, the North American publisher of Terraforming Mars, was answering a viewer question where they asked if Terraforming Mars was going to get a legacy treatment. And he said that it would do. And that the designers of the game, the Fricks brothers from Fricks Publishing, were actually working or perhaps in the early stages of working on a legacy version of the game, but it wouldn't be ready until 2020 or 2021. So quite some time off yet, but the question is, how do people feel about this? If you're a Terraforming Mars fan, is this something that interests you? Terraforming Mars is one of my favorite games. It's one of the games I've played the most. And I have to be honest, I do think it could work as a legacy game. I am certainly curious about it. I think the only danger is, will people be burned out on Terraforming Mars by then? Because there's been kind of an almost overabundance of expansions for this game, and we're sort of being hit it feels like every couple of months with a new expansion that's come out, which is great on the one hand, but on the other hand, there is a possibility for Terraforming Mars fatigue to kick in. And will people be, will they be tired of hearing about Terraforming Mars by that stage? Will they have moved on to new games? There's a couple of other big games potentially in the space and space colonization realm coming out. Vital Lacerda is coming out with a new game, I believe this year or perhaps next year, called On Mars. How will people react to that? We don't know. There may be some other games announced that are set in that Mars thematic universe. Obviously, with the massive success of Terraforming Mars, it's one of those themes that people are quite interested in from a design and publishing perspective. But I think on the whole, the gameplay mechanisms and the theme of Terraforming Mars do lend themselves quite well to a legacy game, because you can imagine generations of settlers on Mars advancing in technology, developing the planet more, building out colonies, cities, infrastructure, and I think that could work really well. It may be something where they use the kind of stickering system like we saw in games like Pandemic Legacy, or Charterstone, for example. There may be other ideas and concepts in there that could be quite interesting, but to have that additional depth and maybe have a little bit more of a narrative arc moving through the game could be really, really interesting, to me at least. And I think the question is, how do they execute it? How do they draw the balance between theme and narrative and mechanics of the game? And can they do it in a way that is not going to burn people out? How is that all going to come together? We've seen quite a few legacy games being released over the past couple of years since the success of Pandemic Legacy, and not all of them have been huge successes. A few of them have flown under the radar. I think even Pandemic Legacy Season 2 didn't quite carry the gravitas that Pandemic Legacy Season 1 did. So it's not a guarantee that just because you slap Legacy on a game that it's going to work. I think the gameplay has to be right, the theme has to be right, and the narrative, I think, has to be in there. Legacy games are inherently best where you have a story that's propelling you through the game over these generations and over these multiple plays to bring you back. I haven't tried games like Charterstone, but they don't inherently have much appeal for me because, for me, I don't see the point in having a legacy game where you're kind of adding in all these new mechanisms or rules or whatever just to kind of play a more mechanical style, narrative-free game. You might as well just have all those mechanisms and gameplay mechanics right at the beginning. But what I loved about Pandemic Legacy was that there was a story, there was, the rules and the changes to the game, were driven through an exciting narrative. And if they can pull that off in Terraforming Mars, that'd be great. And I do know that the original idea for Terraforming Mars was based on a series of books, and I think there was 3 books in the series. That could be a little bit where the designers are drawing their inspiration from. So I think this one could be quite interesting. I think there'll be a lot of Terraforming Mars fans out there who will be anticipating this with a lot of excitement. But what do you guys think? Are you Terraforming Mars fans? If not, could a legacy version perhaps draw you in? Can you imagine any issues or problems with how this might work? Let me know in the comments, or if you want to catch me on Twitter, I'm at Game Minimalist there. Let me know your views. I'd really love to hear and be very curious to see what your take on this is. Thank you.